The National Association of Realtors is getting rocked in court this year. Will real estate commission structures change? I want to break it down and tell you what all of this means to buyers, sellers, and real estate agents. Hey everybody, Melanie Atkinson here, Realtor with Smith & Associates in beautiful Tampa, Florida. Today I am going to walk directly into the fire and talk to you about what all of these lawsuits against the National Association of Realtors could mean for the real estate industry. Please don't assume that you already know what a real estate agent is going to say about real estate agent compensation. Stick with me. I have no intention of saying that everything in the real estate world is perfect and that things couldn't change based on modern technologies. However, the issues here are far more complicated than what you're seeing in the headlines and hearing in the sound bites. If you don't know what lawsuits I'm referring to, let me catch you up. This week, a federal jury in Kansas City found the National Association of Realtors, also known as NAR, and some of the country's largest brokerages guilty of colluding to inflate real estate commissions. And this isn't the only lawsuit that NAR and large brokerages have had to deal with this year. There was also a very similar case that was settled earlier in the year. What the lawsuits are really talking about is the fact that traditionally, sellers are the ones on the hook for paying the buyer's broker commissions. The sellers in the class action lawsuits said the brokerages collaborated with NAR to enforce what is called the clear cooperation rule. This rule requires the seller's brokerage to offer compensation to a buyer's brokerage in order to have the property listed on the multiple listing service, the MLS, as we all know it. The MLS is our primary database to list homes, so obviously sellers want to be on there to maximize exposure. Okay, let's pause there. Here is a really important point that headlines are not making. The clear cooperation rule does not include any specific compensation amounts or percentages. On my MLS, you can put any amount down for buyer broker compensation, as low as $1. So as a seller, to get your listing on the MLS, you are only required to compensate a buyer's broker $1, which is essentially nothing. If the circumstances were different and NAR had a standard compensation amount, then absolutely, that is collusion. But that's not the rule. It's very frustrating when I'm reading articles by reputable news sources that keep referring to standard commission percentages as if they are a requirement to get a listing on the MLS. That's just not the case. I assure you that there are all sorts of different compensations on my MLS for a buyer's broker. All of that being said, I totally understand why the public thinks that there are standard commissions in real estate. But a seller being required to pay a certain amount and the seller agreeing to pay a certain amount because they understand the benefits of it are two totally different things. So let's understand this better. When and why did sellers ever start paying a buyer's broker? Let's rewind the clock and go back to 1913. The organization that would become NAR said that their members should always be ready and willing to divide regular commissions equally to another member who produces the buyer. That seems good. The seller agrees to pay the listing brokerage a certain amount when they sign their listing agreement. Then the listing brokerage agrees to split that amount with the brokerage that brings the buyer. That cooperation between different brokerages helps sellers advertise their house to more people and helps buyers have more choices. It feels like a win for everybody. Now, this next one is a really important point. The seller paying the compensation is the key to making this cooperation work for everybody. If a seller doesn't agree to cooperate and provide incentive for a different brokerage to bring them a buyer, then the seller's pool of buyers is greatly restricted. It's essentially restricted to just the agents within the brokerage that has the listing. Limiting the amount of buyers that are coming to see your house doesn't typically equate to getting the highest and best price for your house. That is why this model of compensation has stuck around for so long. Sellers want to incentivize as many brokerages as possible so they get the most exposure and money for their houses. This compensation model wasn't meant to stick it to the sellers, to burden them with all of these costs. It was meant to help them. If we fast forward to today's world, this model is challenged because technology has changed how real estate consumers find their information. If I'm a seller now, it's easy to think, well, I'll just list my house with a brokerage that has a lower fee model. It'll be on the MLS and it'll get the same exposure as the houses that are listed using the more traditional compensation model. I'll have my agent represent my interests as the seller, so why do I need to compensate a buyer's broker when that buyer can see my house on 50 different websites? It's a good question. The short answer is they can. Sellers have tons of lower cost options, especially with the technology of today. You don't even have to list it on the MLS. You can list with a real estate agent that isn't affiliated with NAR. You can list a for sale by owner on a bunch of different websites. There are a ton of builders out there that don't compensate a buyer's broker because they don't need to sell their houses. This is all normal stuff to us real estate agents. The key here is buyers. About 90% of buyers choose to work with a real estate agent. Why? Because even though they have access to see which houses are for sale, they don't necessarily want to navigate all of the challenges of purchasing a home by themselves, especially if they are first-time homebuyers or if they're relocating from another state and aren't familiar with the state's laws and contracts. There are a lot of pitfalls. If we assume the buyer's agent is competent, then having that representation is hugely important for the buyer and the overall success of the transaction. That's why people want an agent. So why don't we pull this compensation apart and have buyers pay for their own representation? Well, you might be surprised to know that this is already common practice with a lot of brokerages. Buyer representation agreements spell out the amount of compensation that the buyer is agreeing to pay their broker when they buy a house. With the traditional model of the seller offering compensation to the buyer's broker, a lot of times this fee is entirely covered by the seller. If it isn't, then the buyer has already agreed to pay the difference. This has been happening for a long time, but most people don't know about it. The biggest factor with these agreements is that buyers don't necessarily want to or have the ability to come up with the extra money to pay their agents. Plus, currently, lending rules do not allow for a buyer to roll a broker's fee into their mortgage. So buyers are struggling to come up with a down payment, plus closing costs, plus potentially a buyer broker fee. If a seller is offering to cover any one of a buyer's fees, that makes the seller's house more attractive to a buyer. It doesn't matter if a seller is covering regular closing costs, an interest rate buy down, a buyer broker fee. Any of those things are an incentive for a buyer. As a seller, if you incentivize more buyers, then you are more likely to get a higher and better price for your house. Going back to the lawsuit, the question I have is, was NAR and the brokerages colluding to get higher fees from sellers, or were they advising their sellers on how to incentivize the most amount of buyers in order to get the best price for their house? If the compensation model changes and buyers can't roll brokerage fees into their loans, my genuine fear is that it will encourage more buyers to go unrepresented. Not only will this be a huge inconvenience for buyers, but it will disproportionately affect the buyers who need good representation the most, like first-time home buyers. It is so frustrating because it feels like all of the current challenges affecting the real estate world, like high interest rates and low inventory, and these lawsuits actually end up affecting first-time home buyers the most. That is the population that we should be encouraging to get in the market, not putting up barrier after barrier. Now, I understand that everything I just said could be turned around and the finger could be pointed directly at us real estate agents. We could accept less compensation. We get paid too much. We are constantly bragging about our big sales. We are an insufferable population of self-promoters. I totally understand why the public doesn't like us. And I fully agree that there are areas to be discussed here that will allow us to keep helping our buyers and sellers, as well as be able to pay our own bills. Real estate agents and brokerages that add value to the industry are not afraid of these lawsuits. And it's not because we're arrogant, it's because we understand buyers and sellers and the value of our role in the transaction. Customers that work with good real estate agents generally don't feel like they have overpaid for services. The problem is, a lot of people have not had any interaction with a realtor they consider good. It is not hard to see why a jury is willing to convict an industry that they don't respect. It has always been my hope that at some point the National Association of Realtors will raise the bar on our industry and require agents to have more experience and more education. I hope this provided some perspective for you all. Thank you for watching. I promise I am not on a soapbox in every video on this channel, but please hit that like button if you found some value in this and hit that subscribe button too. If you're looking for something else to watch on this channel, check out a video I just released about the current challenges of moving to Florida. Thank you all for watching.